I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. Thank you for watching. The envelope trembled in my weathered hands as I sat in the courtroom, watching my daughter Isabella adjust her designer blazer with the same calculated precision she'd used to abandon her children 15 years ago. At 62, I'd learned to recognize the weight of moments that would reshape everything. This manila envelope, worn soft from my fingers tracing its edges over countless sleepless nights, held the power to destroy her carefully constructed lie. Your Honor, Isabella's lawyer was saying, his voice smooth as silk over broken glass. My client has been denied access to her own children for 15 years. She's requesting immediate custody and pursuing kidnapping charges against the defendant, her own mother. Kidnapping. The word tasted like rust in my mouth. I pressed my lips together and felt the familiar ache in my lower back, a reminder of countless nights spent sleeping in hospital chairs, holding vigil over 3 small boys who'd called for their mama in fevered dreams, only to have me whisper, "Abuela's here. Baby, Abuela's here." Judge Morrison, a man whose silver hair and lined face suggested he'd seen every variety of human cruelty, leaned forward. "Mrs. Rodriguez, you've been caring for these children since they were 3 years old." "Yes, Your Honor." My voice came out steadier than I felt. Behind Isabella, I caught sight of my boys, my grandsons, now 17 and towering over most adults in the courtroom. Lucas sat between his brothers, his jaw clenched in that way that reminded me so painfully of their father. Miguel had his hands folded, knuckles white, while Eduardo stared at the floor as if he could disappear into the worn carpet. They didn't know about the envelope yet. They didn't know what their mother had really done. And during this time, the judge continued, the mother had no contact. She visited twice, I said carefully. Once when they were 8, asking for money, once when they were 12, staying 3 days before leaving again. Isabella shifted in her seat, and I caught the flash of something guilt-fear before her mask slipped back into place. She'd always been beautiful. My daughter. Even now at 38, she had that ethereal quality that made people want to protect her, to believe whatever story she told. It had taken me years to see past that beauty to the cold calculation underneath. Your Honor, her lawyer cleared his throat. My client was struggling with postpartum depression and addiction. She needed time to heal. That doesn't negate her parental rights. Postpartum depression. As if that explained abandoning 3 toddlers who cried themselves to sleep for months, who hoarded crackers under their beds because they feared there wouldn't be food tomorrow, who jumped at every sound because their young minds couldn't distinguish between footsteps that might bring their mother home and those that might take them away again. Mrs. Rodriguez. Judge Morrison's voice pulled me back to the present. Do you have documentation of your guardianship? This was my moment. I stood slowly, my knees protesting after hours of sitting on the hard wooden bench. I do, Your Honor, but I'd like to present something else first. I walked to the front of the courtroom, feeling Isabella's eyes burning into my back. The envelope felt impossibly light in my hands, considering the weight of what it contained. What is this? The judge asked, accepting it from me. Proof, I said simply, of what a mother really is. Judge Morrison's eyebrows raised as he opened the envelope. I watched his expression change as he pulled out the first photograph Lucas's first day of kindergarten, gap-toothed grin wide as he held up his new lunchbox. Miguel receiving his first-place ribbon at the science fair, tears of joy streaming down his 6-year-old face. Eduardo, age 7, arms wrapped around my neck after his first successful bike ride without training wheels. But it wasn't just the photographs. There were report cards, each one carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. Every teacher conference note I'd ever written. Permission slips for field trips signed in my careful handwriting. Medical records showing my name as the emergency contact, the authorized guardian, the one who held their hands through broken bones and fevered nights. Your Honor, Isabella's lawyer interjected. Sit down, Judge Morrison said quietly, but with enough steel in his voice that the lawyer immediately complied. The judge continued examining the contents, his face growing more solemn with each item. Mrs. Rodriguez, how long did you compile this? 15 years, I said. Every school event, Every birthday party they weren't invited to because their friends didn't know where their mother was. Every Christmas morning when they asked why she didn't call. Every Father's Day when they made cards for their grandfather, my late husband, because they needed a father figure. And he was all they had until cancer took him 5 years ago. I heard one of my grandsons make a small sound, pain or recognition. I couldn't tell, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't bear to see their faces. Not yet. Judge Morrison held up a particular photograph, and even from where I stood, I recognized it. The boys at age 10, standing in front of our small Christmas tree in my cramped apartment. They were wearing matching pajamas I'd sewn myself because money was tight, their arms around each other, faces glowing with the kind of pure happiness that only children can achieve. "Where were you when this was taken?" the judge asked Isabella directly. She straightened, and for the first time, I saw her composure crack. I was getting my life together. I couldn't what? Send a Christmas card, make a phone call? His voice remained level, but there was something dangerous underneath. "Mrs. Rodriguez, is there anything else in this envelope?" I nodded. "The school records, Your Honor. Every form that required a parent's signature, every emergency contact sheet, every permission slip for 15 years. He pulled out a stack of documents, and I knew what he was seeing. My name over and over again in the space marked Mother Guardian, my phone number listed under emergency contact. My signature on everything from permission for field trips to authorization for medical treatment. And your daughter's name appears on these forms how often?" "Never, Your Honor." "Not once." The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the ancient radiator humming in the corner. Isabella's lawyer whispered something urgent in her ear, but she shook her head, her face pale. Judge Morrison set the envelope on his desk with deliberate care. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I have one more question. Do your grandsons know what's in this envelope?" I met his gaze steadily. "Not yet." "And why is that?" "Because some truths are too heavy for children to carry, even when those children are nearly grown. Because I'd spent 15 years protecting them from the reality that their mother hadn't just left, she'd erased herself from their lives so completely that there wasn't a single piece of paper in any school office with her name on it. Because I wanted them to have the chance to know their mother without the weight of my judgment." The judge leaned back in his chair, and something in his expression told me he'd already made his decision. But before he could speak, Isabella stood abruptly. "I made mistakes," she said, her voice breaking. "But they're still my children. I gave birth to them. I love them." I turned to look at her then, really look at her. She was crying real tears, not the manufactured emotion she'd perfected over the years. For a moment, she looked like the daughter I'd raised, the girl who'd called me at 3:00 in the morning when she was pregnant and scared, the young woman who'd promised she'd be a good mother. But then I remembered the weight of 3 small bodies curled against me during thunderstorms, the pride in their eyes when I cheered at their baseball games, the way they'd started calling me Mama Abuela when they were 5 because I was the only mother they'd ever really known. "Love," I said quietly, "is not a feeling. It's a choice you make every single day." Judge Morrison nodded slowly. "Mrs. Rodriguez, step back, please. I need to speak with the boys." My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched my grandsons stand. 3 identical faces, their father's dark eyes and stubborn jaw. But something of me in the set of their shoulders, the way they moved protectively closer to each other. They approached the bench, and I held my breath. "Lucas, Miguel, Eduardo," the judge said gently. "I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you directly. Do you want to live with your mother?" The silence stretched like a taut wire. Finally, Lucas, always the spokesman for his brothers, cleared his throat. "Your Honor," he said, his voice deeper than I expected. "We don't really know her." Those 6 words hung in the air like a death sentence. I saw Isabella flinch as if she'd been struck, saw her lawyer close his eyes in defeat. But it was what Lucas said next that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "But we'd like the chance to try." The words echoed in the sudden silence of my cramped apartment as I set down 3 mugs of hot chocolate, a ritual I'd maintained every evening for 15 years. Lucas's declaration in the courtroom had earned them a 2-week trial period with Isabella, 2 weeks to decide if they wanted to pursue a relationship with the mother who'd walked away when they still wore diapers. "Abuela, you're shaking," Miguel observed, his gentle nature always attuned to others' emotions. At 17, he'd inherited his father's analytical mind, but coupled it with an empathy that sometimes worried me. The world could be cruel to boys who felt too deeply. I looked down at my hands and realized he was right. The ceramic mug rattled against the saucer as I set it down. "I'm fine, sweetheart." "No, you're not." Eduardo, the youngest by 12 minutes but often the most direct, pushed his glasses up his nose, a nervous habit he'd developed in 3rd grade. "You haven't been fine since court yesterday." They were perched on my old couch, the one I'd bought second-hand when they were 5, and had immediately declared the best fort-building material in the world. The fabric was worn thin in places where their knees had dug in during countless movie nights, and there was still a faint stain from when Miguel had spilled grape juice during a particularly intense game of Monopoly. "Boys," I said carefully, settling into my armchair, the one that faced the couch so I could watch over them, always watching over them. "I want you to know that whatever you decide, I support you." The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, but some lies are necessary shields. How could I tell them that the thought of Isabella taking them felt like dying, that I'd already mentally cataloged every corner of this apartment where their absence would echo? "She wants us to move to Seattle," Lucas said quietly, "with her and her husband." Husband? Isabella had mentioned him briefly in court, some investment banker she'd been with for 3 years. 3 years. And she thought that was stability enough to uproot the boys from the only home they'd ever known. "She showed us pictures of the house," Miguel added. "It has a pool, as if chlorinated water could wash away 15 years of abandonment, as if square footage could measure love." "And our own rooms," Eduardo chimed in, but his voice lacked enthusiasm. "She said we could redecorate however we want." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral while my heart crumbled like old paper. "That sounds nice." "Abuela?" Lucas leaned forward, his dark eyes so like his father's, serious beyond his years. "Why didn't you ever tell us about everything?" He gestured toward the envelope, which now sat on my kitchen table like an accusation. Judge Morrison had allowed me to take it home. Along with his decision, the boys could choose, but they needed the full truth first. I'd been dreading this conversation for 2 days. "Because," I said slowly, "children shouldn't have to carry their parents' failures." "We're not children anymore," Miguel said softly. He was right, of course. Somewhere between helping them with algebra homework and teaching them to drive my ancient Honda Civic, they'd grown into young men. They towered over me now, their voices deep, their faces showing the angular planes of approaching adulthood. But in my heart, they were still 3-year-olds with tear-stained cheeks asking when Mama was coming home. "No," I agreed. "You're not?" I stood and retrieved the envelope, my fingers tracing its familiar edges. Inside were not just photographs and documents, but the weight of every choice I'd made, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment I'd chosen their well-being over my own comfort. "Your mother was 23 when you were born," I began, settling back into my chair. "Younger than you are now. Your father, God rest his soul, was deployed overseas. She was alone with 3 babies, and I failed her." The words came out cracked, like glass under pressure. I'd never admitted this aloud, not even to myself. "What do you mean?" Eduardo asked. "I was working 2 jobs then. Your grandfather had just been diagnosed with his first bout of cancer, and the medical bills were crushing us. When Isabella called crying, saying she couldn't handle it anymore, I told her she needed to be stronger. I told her that motherhood required sacrifice. I pulled out a photograph, one I'd never shown them Isabella at 24, gaunt and hollow-eyed, holding all 3 of them while they screamed. She looked like a ghost of herself. I should have seen that she was drowning," I continued. "Should have moved in, taken leave from work, something. Instead, I gave her advice from my kitchen while she was falling apart in hers." "That doesn't excuse what she did," Lucas said, and there was steel in his voice that reminded me painfully of myself. No, I agreed. It doesn't, but it explains it. Your mother didn't just abandon you. She abandoned the part of herself that was failing you. Some people run toward their problems, and some people run away. Isabella ran. Miguel was crying silently, tears tracking down his cheeks. Eduardo had gone very still, the way he always did when processing difficult emotions. Lucas's jaw was clenched, his hands fisted. So why come back now? Lucas asked. Why sue you for kidnapping? This was the part I'd hoped to avoid, but they deserved the truth. I reached into the envelope and pulled out a folder I'd kept separate from the rest legal documents I'd received just last month. Your father had a life insurance policy, I said quietly. A substantial one. It was set up to be released when you turned 18, with your mother as the beneficiary since she was listed as your guardian. The silence that followed was deafening. She's only here for the money, Eduardo whispered. We don't know that for certain. Yes, we do. Lucas stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the small courtyard where I'd taught them to ride bicycles. The timing isn't a coincidence, is it? Abuela, we turn 18 in 3 months. 3 months. The number hung between us like a countdown timer. There's something else, I said, hating myself for what I was about to reveal. She filed the paperwork to have me declared an unfit guardian 6 months ago, but she waited until now to serve it. Why? Miguel asked, though I could see in his eyes that he already knew. Because if I was found unfit, she would automatically regain custody, and as your legal guardian, she'd have access to the insurance money immediately. Not when you turn 18. The betrayal hit them like a physical blow. I watched as the last traces of childhood hope drained from their faces, replaced by something harder, colder. It was like watching them age years in a matter of seconds. She never wanted us back, Eduardo said flatly. She wanted the money. We can't be certain of her motives. Stop protecting her, Lucas snapped, whirling to face me. Stop protecting us. We're not babies anymore, Abuela. We can handle the truth. He was right, but the protective instincts I'd honed over 15 years were hard to suppress. I'd spent so long shielding them from Isabella's abandonment that I'd forgotten they were strong enough to face it. You're right, I said quietly. I'm sorry. Lucas's anger deflated as quickly as it had risen. He crossed the room and knelt beside my chair, taking my hands in his much larger ones. Don't apologize for loving us. The simple words broke something open inside me, and I felt tears I'd been holding back for days finally spill over. These boys, these young men, had been my entire world for 15 years. I'd poured everything I had into raising them, had sacrificed my retirement savings, my social life, my own dreams to give them stability and love. And they'd grown into remarkable human beings despite the circumstances of their early childhood. What happens now? Miguel asked softly. I wiped my eyes and straightened my shoulders. Now you decide. You have a choice to make, and whatever you choose, I'll respect it. Even if we choose her, Eduardo asked. The question pierced my heart, but I met his gaze steadily. Even then, because that's what love really was, not possession, but the willingness to let go when it served the other person's best interests, even if it destroyed you in the process. We need some time, Lucas said. To think, I nodded, understanding. They filed toward their shared bedroom, the small space where I'd somehow managed to fit 3 twin beds and their accumulated belongings of 17 years. I heard their voices through the thin wall, low and serious, the sound of boys becoming men in the span of a single conversation. I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by the evidence of our life together, their school awards on the wall, family photos on every surface, the chaos of homework and sports equipment that somehow made the cramped space feel like home. My phone buzzed. A text message from Isabella. The boys seemed upset when I dropped them off. I hope you're not poisoning them against me. We need to talk before their decision. Can you meet me tomorrow? I stared at the message for a long time, feeling something cold and sharp crystallize in my chest. She wanted to talk. After 15 years of silence, after a legal battle that had cost me my last savings, after trying to steal the children I'd raised. She wanted to talk. I typed back, Rosewood Cafe, 2 p.m. Then I set the phone aside and began planning what would be my daughter's final lesson in consequences. The Rosewood Cafe had been Isabella's favorite place when she was 16, back when she still called me Mama instead of using my first name like a stranger. I chose it deliberately, wanting her to remember who she used to be before greed calcified her heart into something unrecognizable. I arrived early, claiming the corner table where she used to do her homework while I worked the evening shift at the diner across the street. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent her entire childhood juggling multiple jobs to provide for her, only to watch her abandon her own children the moment things became difficult. At exactly 2 p.m., Isabella walked in wearing a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 3 months. She'd always been beautiful, but there was something artificial about her now, like a photograph that had been retouched too many times. Success suited her, I had to admit, even if it was built on the foundation of abandoning her responsibilities. "Mama," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. The word sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in the mirror. "Isabella." I kept my voice neutral, studying her face. At 38, she still looked young, but there were lines around her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Guilt, perhaps, or just the natural erosion of time. She ordered a skinny latte with oat milk, of course she did, while I stuck with black coffee. Some things never changed. "The boys seem confused," she began once the waitress left. "I can tell you've been filling their heads with your version of events." Your version. As if there were multiple interpretations of abandonment, as if the truth was somehow negotiable. "I told them the facts," I said quietly. "Nothing more. Facts can be presented in different ways." She leaned forward, her voice taking on that wheedling tone I remembered from her teenage years when she wanted something. "You have to understand. I was sick after they were born. Postpartum depression is a real medical condition. You couldn't call for 15 years. The question hung between us like a blade. Isabella's carefully constructed explanation crumbled, and for a moment, I saw something raw in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or the dawning realization that her lies wouldn't work on me the way they had on her lawyer. "I wanted to," she said softly, "but the longer I stayed away, the harder it became. How do you explain to 3 little boys that their mother just left?" "You don't explain," I said. "You apologize. You come home. You do the work." "I was building a life." "You were running away." My voice remained steady, but I felt something cold and final settling in my chest. "And now you're back, because that life you built requires funding." Isabella's face flushed. This isn't about money." I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder I'd prepared that morning, printouts from social media, public records, everything I'd researched after the court hearing. I spread them across the small table like tarot cards, revealing a bitter future. "Your husband's investment firm is under federal investigation," I said conversationally. "His assets are frozen. You've been living in the house you can't afford on credit cards that are maxed out. Your car is 3 months behind on payments." Isabella stared at the papers, her face growing pale. "How did you—" "I may be old, but I'm not stupid." I tapped one of the documents. "You filed for bankruptcy protection 2 months ago, the same week you had me served with custody papers." The cafe bustled around us, the cheerful chatter of other patrons forming a surreal soundtrack to our confrontation. Isabella's latte sat untouched, foam dissolving into beige mediocrity. "Even if that were true," she said, rallying, "it doesn't change the fact that they're my children. I have rights." Rights. I tasted the word like something spoiled. "Tell me, Isabella, what rights did they have? The right to a mother who showed up? The right to birthday cards? The right to know they were wanted?" "I made mistakes." "You made choices." I gathered the papers and returned them to my purse with deliberate care. "Every day for 15 years. You chose not to pick up the phone, not to send a letter, not to ask how they were doing. I thought they were better off without me." "No, you thought you were better off without them." The accuracy of the statement hit her like a physical blow. I watched her composure crack, watched the mask slip just enough to reveal the selfish girl who had always lurked beneath my daughter's pretty surface. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. "I want you to leave." "I can't do that." "I need the insurance money." "Yes, I know." I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to withdraw your custody petition. You're going to return to Seattle and tell your husband that the money isn't coming. And you're going to leave my grandsons alone. And if I don't..." This was the moment I'd been building toward. The culmination of 2 sleepless nights spent researching, planning, preparing for war. I reached into my purse again and pulled out a different folder. This one thicker, more substantial. "Then I'll destroy you," Isabella laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "With what? You're a 62-year-old woman living in a studio apartment. What could you possibly..." I opened the folder and began laying out photographs. Not the sweet family moments from the envelope I'd shown the judge, but something else entirely: screenshots from social media posts, credit card statements, hotel receipts, all obtained through perfectly legal means by a private investigator I'd hired with my last $1,000. "This is you in Cabo last spring," I said conversationally, pointing to a photo of Isabella on a yacht, champagne glass raised in celebration. "Same week Miguel was in the hospital with pneumonia. I called every number I had for you. You never answered." Isabella's face went ashen. "This is your credit card statement from that trip. $15,000 on spa treatments and shopping while I was working double shifts to cover his medical bills." I moved to the next document. "And this is particularly interesting. Your marriage certificate to James Harrington, dated 3 years ago. Apparently, you've been married this whole time, not just dating your husband. How did you..." "See, public records, amazing what you can find when you actually bother to look." I spread out more papers. "Your husband, James, is the one under federal investigation. By the way, wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, the kind of charges that carry serious prison time." Isabella was shaking now, her hands pressed flat against the table. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand something very clearly," I said, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Those boys have been my whole world for 15 years. I have sacrificed everything: my savings, my retirement, my health, my social life, to give them the stability you couldn't provide. I will not let you waltz back into their lives and destroy them for money." They said they wanted to try. They said that because they're good boys with kind hearts who still hope somewhere deep down that their mother might actually love them. I began gathering the papers. "But you and I both know that's not why you're here. You can't prove..." "I can prove all of it: your financial situation, your marriage, your complete absence from their lives until it became financially advantageous to return. I have documentation of every lie you told in court." Isabella stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. "You're not the same person who raised me." "No," I agreed. "That woman was too trusting, too forgiving, too willing to believe that people could change." I stood, shouldering my purse. "The woman sitting across from you now has been forged by 15 years of putting 3 children to bed every night while they asked why their mother didn't love them enough to stay." "I do love them." "Love is not a feeling, Isabella. Love is showing up. Love is sacrifice. Love is putting someone else's needs before your own. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." I looked down at her, this stranger who shared my blood but none of my values. "You don't know what love is." I turned to leave, but her voice stopped me. "What if I fight you? What if I take this to trial?" I turned back, and something in my expression must have frightened her because she pressed herself back into her chair. "Then I'll take everything to the media: the abandoned children, the missing mother who returned for money, the criminal husband, the bankruptcy, all of it. And when your reputation is destroyed and your husband goes to prison and you have nothing left, I'll make sure the boys know exactly what kind of person their mother really is. You wouldn't do that to them. Try me." I walked out of this cafe into the crisp afternoon air, leaving Isabella sitting alone among the ruins of her carefully constructed lies. My hands were steady now, my purpose clear. She had 15 years to prove she was a mother. Now she had 15 hours to prove she was smart enough to walk away. But as I drove home to my grandson's, I knew with cold certainty that she wouldn't leave quietly. People like Isabella never did. They always had to push, to test boundaries, to see how much they could take before the world finally said no. Fortunately, I was ready for whatever came next. The call came at 6:47 a.m., jarring me from the first decent sleep I'd had in weeks. I fumbled for my phone, my heart immediately racing with the panic that comes from 17 years of being the emergency contact for 3 active boys. "Mrs. Rodriguez," the voice was professional, clipped. "This is Detective Sarah Martinez with Seattle PD. I'm calling about your daughter, Isabella Rodriguez Harrington." The formal tone told me everything I needed to know before she said another word. I sat up in bed, my bare feet finding the cold hardwood floor. "What's happened?" "She was arrested last night on charges related to her husband's federal case. Wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering. She's asking for you to contact her attorney." I closed my eyes, feeling something that wasn't quite satisfaction settle in my chest, more like inevitability, like watching a house collapse that had been built on sand from the beginning. "Mrs. Rodriguez, are you there?" "I'm here." I walked to my window, looking out at the courtyard where my grandsons used to play. "Detective, I need you to understand something. My daughter and I are estranged. I have no intention of contacting her attorney or providing assistance of any kind." There was a pause. "She said you'd say that. She asked me to tell you that she's willing to sign custody papers in exchange for legal representation." The audacity was breathtaking. Even from a jail cell, Isabella was trying to negotiate, to find an angle that served her interests, as if custody of the boys she'd abandoned was a commodity she could trade for her freedom. "Tell my daughter," I said carefully, "that I'll be in touch." I hung up and sat in the silence of my small apartment, watching dust motes dance in the morning light. Through the thin walls, I could hear my grandsons stirring, the familiar sounds of 3 young men getting ready for school, Miguel's gentle humming as he showered, Eduardo's muttered complaints about his calculus homework, Lucas's careful movements as he tried not to wake his brothers. They didn't know yet. In a few hours, their phones would start buzzing with news alerts, social media notifications, the digital avalanche that followed any scandal involving money and betrayal. Their classmates would see their mother's mugshot on the evening news. Their teachers would look at them with that particular blend of pity and curiosity reserved for children of criminals. I had to tell them first. "Boys," I called softly, tapping on their bedroom door. "Can you come out here? We need to talk." They emerged in various stages of readiness, Lucas fully dressed for school, Miguel in pajama pants and a t-shirt, Eduardo with his hair sticking up at impossible angles. One look at my face told them this wasn't about chores or schedules. "Sit down," I said gently. They arranged themselves on the couch, 3 identical faces wearing identical expressions of concern. Even now, even at 17, they moved as a unit, supporting each other through instinct and years of practice. "Your mother was arrested last night," I said without preamble. Sometimes the kindest cut is the cleanest one. The silence that followed was profound. I watched them process the information, saw the flicker of emotions across their faces, surprise, confusion, and then something that looked almost like relief. "For what?" Lucas asked finally. "Financial crimes related to her husband's business, wire fraud, money laundering." I sat down across from them, my hands folded in my lap. "It's going to be in the news. Your classmates will probably see it before you get to school." Miguel was the first to speak, his voice quiet but steady. "Is she going to prison?" "I don't know. Probably." Eduardo adjusted his glasses, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. "What happens to us?" "Nothing changes," I said firmly. "You're 17 years old, almost adults. You have a home here for as long as you want it. You have college acceptance letters waiting. You have a future that has nothing to do with your mother's choices." "She wanted us to move to Seattle," Miguel said softly. "With her, she wanted the insurance money," Lucas corrected, his voice hard. "We were just the key to accessing it." I winced at the bitterness in his tone, even though he was right. "I know this is difficult. No, Lucas stood abruptly, pacing to the window. It's not difficult. It's clarifying. She didn't want us 15 years ago, and she doesn't want us now. Everything else is just details. His brothers nodded, and I saw something I'd never expected, not grief or anger, but a kind of grim peace, as if a question they'd carried their entire lives had finally been answered definitively. Abuela, Eduardo said carefully. What did you do? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean, you knew this was going to happen? Miguel said. Yesterday, when you left to meet her, you looked different, determined. I studied their faces, these boys who knew me better than anyone in the world. They'd inherited their father's intelligence and their grandfather's intuition. Of course they'd noticed. I gave her a choice, I said finally. Leave voluntarily or face the consequences of her actions. And she didn't leave, Lucas observed. No, she didn't. So you destroyed her. The words hung in the air like an accusation. I waited for the judgment, the horror, the disappointment that their grandmother had become someone capable of such calculated ruthlessness. Instead, Eduardo smiled, a small, sad expression that somehow conveyed both approval and sorrow. Good, he said quietly. Eduardo, no. Abuela, she had 15 years to be our mother, 15 years to call, to visit, to care. Instead, she shows up when we're about to inherit money and tries to take us away from the only parent we've ever really known. His voice grew stronger. You protected us. Again. Miguel nodded. How did you know about her husband? I hesitated, then decided they deserved the truth. I hired a private investigator after the custody hearing. I needed to understand why she'd really come back. That must have been expensive, Lucas said. It was my last 1,000. I shrugged. Money well spent. They exchanged glances, that wordless communication that had always amazed me. Finally, Miguel spoke for all of them. We're not going to school today. Boys, you can't miss. We're staying home with you, Lucas said firmly. Today is going to be hard enough without dealing with questions from classmates and teachers. Eduardo was already reaching for his phone. I'll call in sick for all of us. I wanted to protest, to insist they maintain their normal routines, but the truth was, I needed them as much as they needed me. In a few hours, my phone would start ringing reporters, social workers, lawyers, well-meaning neighbors who'd seen the news. Having my grandsons by my side would make facing that storm easier. Okay, I said, but we're going to spend the day doing something productive. College applications, scholarship essays, planning for your futures. Speaking of which, Lucas said, settling back onto the couch. What happens when we turn 18 with the insurance money? I'd been dreading this question. It's yours, all of it. Your father wanted you to have financial security for college and beyond. How much? Eduardo asked. Enough to pay for college at any school that accepts you. Enough to start your adult lives without debt. I paused. Enough that your mother thought it was worth destroying our family to get her hands on it. The number $1.2 million split 3 ways had been burning in my mind since I'd first learned of the policy. It was more money than I'd ever seen, more than enough to give these boys opportunities I could never provide on my own. She can't get it now, can she? Miguel asked. With the arrest, no. Her legal troubles make it impossible for her to claim guardianship, and you'll be adults before her case is resolved. I smiled, feeling genuine satisfaction for the first time in weeks. Your father's money will go exactly where he intended to his son's futures. My phone rang, interrupting the moment. The caller ID showed a Seattle number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Rodriguez, this is James Morrison, attorney for Isabella Rodriguez Harrington. My client would like to discuss terms for signing over custody in exchange for... I hung up without letting him finish. Her lawyer, Lucas asked. Yes. What did he want? I looked at my grandsons, these remarkable young men who'd survived abandonment and uncertainty to become people of character and strength. They deserved to know exactly how their mother's story ended. Your mother wants to trade you for legal representation, I said bluntly. She's offering to sign away her parental rights if I'll pay for her defense. The silence that followed was different from before, not shocked or hurt, but coldly angry. What are you going to tell him? Eduardo asked. I walked to my desk and pulled out a piece of paper, the same legal document I'd had prepared weeks ago. Just in case. A formal statement declining any financial responsibility for Isabella's legal troubles, along with a detailed accounting of every expense I'd incurred raising her children. I'm going to tell him exactly what his client is worth to me, I said, reaching for my pen. Nothing. 6 months later, I stood in the corridor of the federal courthouse in Seattle, watching through reinforced glass as Isabella was led away in handcuffs. The orange jumpsuit made her look smaller somehow, diminished. The jury had taken less than 4 hours to find her guilty on all counts. 18 months to 3 years, the judge had said. With good behavior, she might be out in 15 months. By then, my grandsons would be sophomores in college, building lives that had nothing to do with the woman who'd birthed them and everything to do with the choices they made every day. Mrs. Rodriguez, a reporter thrust a microphone toward my face. How do you feel about your daughter's conviction? I looked directly into the camera, thinking of the boys back home in Portland, probably watching this moment on the evening news from their dorm rooms at 3 different universities. Justice, I said simply, is rarely satisfying, but it's necessary. I walked away from the courthouse and climbed into my car. Not the ancient Honda anymore, but a reliable used Subaru I'd bought with money from an unexpected source. The boys had insisted, using part of their insurance inheritance to ensure I had safe, dependable transportation. Abuela, Lucas had said when he handed me the keys. You've given us everything. Let us give you this. The drive back to Portland took 4 hours, giving me time to reflect on everything that had changed since that morning in the courtroom when I'd first pulled out that manila envelope. The apartment felt different now, quieter without the constant bustle of 3 teenagers, but not empty. Their voices still echoed in every corner, and they called every Sunday without fail, taking turns so I heard from at least one of them each week. Miguel was studying pre-med at Stanford, his gentle nature perfectly suited for the healing profession he'd chosen. Eduardo had followed his love of technology to MIT, where his professors marveled at his intuitive understanding of complex systems. And Lucas was at Northwestern studying journalism with a focus on investigative reporting. I want to expose the truth, he told me, like you did with Mom. My phone rang as I unlocked my apartment door. Lucas's number. Abuela, we saw the news. All of you. Miguel called a conference. We're all here. I could hear voices in the background, my boys together despite being scattered across the country. Modern technology had its advantages. How are you feeling? This was Miguel, his voice gentle as always. Relieved, I said honestly. Closure has a weight to it. Good. Eduardo's voice was firm. She made her choices. Now she gets to live with them. There was a pause, and then Lucas spoke again. Abuela, we have something to tell you. We've been planning this for weeks. My heart skipped. At 63, I'd learned to be wary of surprises from the boys I'd raised. They had a tendency toward grand gestures. We're all flying home for Thanksgiving, Miguel said. But that's not the surprise. We bought a house, Eduardo announced. Well, we made an offer. 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a real kitchen with room for all of us to cook together. I sank into my armchair, the one that had witnessed countless homework sessions and midnight conversations. Boys, it's in your name, Lucas interrupted. Completely paid for. We used our inheritance money. And before you argue, remember that Dad's insurance was meant to secure our futures. Our future includes you, Abuela. It always has. Tears I hadn't expected began tracking down my cheeks. You can't just, we already did, Miguel said gently. The closing is next month. We'll all be home for winter break to move you in. Your education is paid for, Eduardo said. We set aside enough for tuition, living expenses, everything. The house money is separate. We planned this carefully. Abuela, we learned from the best. I thought of all the sacrifices I'd made over the years, the missed meals so they could eat, the secondhand clothes so they could have new school supplies, the empty savings account that had funded their dreams. They'd been watching, learning, understanding what family really meant. Besides, Lucas added, and I could hear the smile in his voice, we'll need somewhere to bring our future wives to meet their grandmother-in-law. This apartment is way too small for that kind of intimidation. I laughed through my tears, imagining these three remarkable young men someday bringing partners home, continuing the cycle of love and protection that had defined our little family. "There's something else," Miguel said quietly. "We've been talking, and we want to legally change our last names to Rodriguez Suarez. Your name and Dad's." The silence stretched between us, heavy with 15 years of shared history. They were honoring me in the most profound way possible, claiming me as their mother as they'd already claimed me in their hearts. "Are you sure?" I whispered. "We've never been more sure of anything." Lucas said firmly, "You're our mother in every way that matters. It's time the paperwork reflected that reality." I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by the completeness of this moment. Isabella had lost everything: her freedom, her money, her children, her dignity. And in losing it all, she'd inadvertently given me the greatest gift possible, the absolute certainty that the boys I'd raised knew the difference between the woman who'd given birth to them and the woman who'd truly loved them. "What about your father's name?" I asked. "Suarez was his family name." "We'll hyphenate," Eduardo said. "Rodriguez Suarez. We'll carry both legacies, Dad's love and your sacrifice." Isabella Rodriguez Harrington stared at the cold metal table in the visitor's room of the King County Correctional Facility. 3 weeks into her sentence, the reality of her situation was finally sinking in. The orange jumpsuit scratched against her skin, a constant reminder of how far she'd fallen. She closed her eyes, remembering the luxurious silk blouses that used to hang in her closet, the cashmere sweaters, the designer shoes all seized now, along with the house in Seattle's Magnolia neighborhood, the vacation condo in Whistler, the cars, the jewelry, all gone, just like her children. The door buzzed open, and she looked up, expecting to see her court-appointed attorney, the only one who ever visited. Instead, she saw her mother. Carmen Rodriguez stood in the doorway, her silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a simple navy blue pantsuit that Isabella recognized from the trial. Her mother had always been beautiful in that quiet, dignified way that seemed impervious to age. Even now, at 63, she carried herself with a grace Isabella had spent a lifetime trying to emulate. "Mama." The word escaped before she could stop it, a reflex from childhood. Carmen sat down across from her, placing a small envelope on the table. No smile, no greeting, just those dark eyes that had always seen through Isabella's lies. "Why are you here?" Isabella asked, her voice smaller than she intended. "The boys asked me to come," Carmen replied simply. "They have questions that only you can answer." Isabella felt something crack inside her chest. "They want to know about me. They want to know about their father." Isabella flinched. Alejandro Suarez, the ghost that had haunted her for 15 years, the name she'd tried so hard to forget. "What do they want to know?" she asked carefully. "Everything. How you met. Why you married. Why he died." Carmen's gaze was steady, unblinking. "The truth, Isabella. For once in your life, give them the truth." Isabella looked down at her hands, pale now, without the expensive manicures she'd maintained for years. She'd been so careful to hide the truth, crafting an elaborate fiction about Alejandro dying heroically in combat overseas. A convenient story for abandoned children. Your father was a hero, not a man who chose to die rather than live with the knowledge of what his wife had done. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "You owe them this, after everything you've taken from them. You owe them their history." Isabella nodded slowly. "How are they really?" Something softened in Carmen's expression, just slightly. "They're thriving. Lucas is passionate about journalism. Miguel wants to be a doctor. Eduardo is creating things with computers I can't begin to understand. They're good boys. Men, really. Because of you," Isabella said, the admission painful but necessary. "Not me." "Yes," Carmen agreed, without pride or malice, just acknowledging a fact. "But they still have questions only you can answer." Isabella took a deep breath. "Will you tell them I'll tell you everything? And you can decide what they should know." Carmen considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Start at the beginning." Isabella closed her eyes, traveling back 17 years to when she was 21 and beautiful, and so certain the world would bend to her will. I met Alejandro at a club in San Diego. He was stationed at the naval base there. He was different from the other guys, quieter, smarter. He read poetry. Can you believe that a Marine who read Pablo Neruda and could quote it from memory? She opened her eyes, half expecting to see skepticism on her mother's face. But Carmen was simply listening, her expression neutral. We got married after 6 months. It was fast, but he was being deployed, and we thought. Isabella stopped, correcting herself. I told him it made sense. The truth is, I was already sleeping with James. Even then, Carmen's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't interrupt. James was rich, exciting. Alejandro was steady, safe. I was young and stupid, and thought I could have both. When I got pregnant, I assumed they were Alejandro's because of the timing, but I wasn't sure. Not completely. James had broken things off when he found out I was married, and Alejandro was overseas, and suddenly I was alone with triplets and postpartum depression and... She trailed off, remembering those dark months after the boys were born. The crushing weight of responsibility, the fear that she was doing everything wrong, the endless crying the babies, and her own. I wasn't ready to be a mother, she said finally. I wasn't strong enough. No one is ready, Carmen said quietly. You learn as you go. You endure. Isabella nodded, acknowledging the rebuke. Alejandro came home on leave when the boys were 6 months old. He found texts on my phone from James. I'd reached out again, desperate for, I don't know, an escape, I guess. She paused, the memory still sharp after all these years. Alejandro confronted me. We fought. He left, and I thought he just needed time to cool off. The police came the next morning. He'd checked into a motel and... Isabella's voice broke. He shot himself, Mama. He left a note saying he couldn't live with the knowledge that I'd betrayed him, that the boys might not be his. That's why I left them with you. Every time I looked at them, I saw him. I saw what I'd done. Carmen's expression didn't change, but Isabella saw her hands tighten slightly on the envelope. Did you ever get the boys tested to know for sure? Isabella nodded. Before I left them with you, they're his. All 3 of them. I never told James. He just assumed they were Alejandro's, and I let him believe it. It was easier. So you abandoned your children because they reminded you of your guilt. It wasn't a question, but Isabella answered anyway. Yes, and then years passed, and the longer I stayed away, the harder it became to come back. How do you explain to a child that you left because you couldn't bear to look at them? You don't, Carmen said simply. But you also don't sue for custody 15 years later because you need money. Isabella felt her face flush with shame. James found out about the insurance policy. It was his idea to get custody. He said it would be easy, I'm their mother. You're old. The courts favor biological parents. I knew it was wrong. But by then, our finances were collapsing. The FBI was investigating his firm. We were desperate. And the boys were just a means to an end. Carmen's voice was flat. At first, Isabella admitted. But then I saw them in court that day. They've grown into such handsome young men. Mama, I started to think maybe I could be their mother after all. Maybe we could start over. With money as the foundation. Carmen shook her head. That's not how family works. Isabella knew she was right. She'd spent 15 years chasing wealth, status, the approval of people like James, people who ultimately didn't care about her beyond what she could provide. She'd traded her children for a lifestyle that had now been stripped away, leaving her with nothing but regret. What do I do now? She asked, her voice small. How do I make this right? Carmen pushed the envelope across the table. You can't make it right, but you can give them closure. I brought pictures of Alejandro. Write them a letter, a real one, not excuses or justifications. Tell them about their father. Tell them the truth about why you left. They're old enough now to understand complicated truths. Isabella picked up the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside were photos she hadn't seen in years. Alejandro in his Marine uniform. Alejandro holding the boys as newborns. Alejandro and Isabella on their wedding day. Both looking so young, so full of hope for the future. "They look like him," she whispered. "Especially around his eyes." "Yes," Carmen agreed. "They have his intelligence, too, and his moral compass. Thankfully." The barb stung, but Isabella knew she deserved it. "Will they read my letter if I write it?" "I don't know," Carmen said honestly. "That will be their choice. But it's the only thing you have left to give them." Isabella nodded, clutching the photos. "I never stopped thinking about them. You know, I checked your social media sometimes, when I could bear it. I saw the pictures you posted of their birthdays, their graduations." "I know," Carmen said. "The private investigator found your anonymous accounts. You were watching from a distance, but never close enough to touch. Never close enough to matter." The truth of it burned like acid. Isabella had been a ghost in her children's lives, present but unseen, unwilling to step into the light where her actions would be visible. "I was afraid," she admitted. "Afraid they would hate me, afraid they would reject me, afraid they would look at me the way you're looking at me now." "And how is that?" "Like I'm a stranger. Someone you used to know but don't recognize anymore." Carmen's expression softened slightly. "You are a stranger, Isabella. To me. To them. People are formed by their choices, and your choices took you away from us. Now you have to live with those choices." "For how long?" Isabella asked, unable to keep the desperation from her voice. "How long do I have to pay for mistakes I made when I was young and scared?" "That's not for me to say," Carmen replied, standing up. "But I will tell you this. Those boys have more capacity for forgiveness than either of us deserve. They sent me here not out of malice or curiosity, but because they genuinely want to understand where they came from. That's the kind of men they've become, men who seek understanding, not vengeance." Isabella felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I didn't deserve them. Did I?" "No," Carmen said simply. "You didn't. But they deserved better than what you gave them. Write the letter, Isabella. It's time they heard the truth from you. Not from me, not from court documents. Just once. Be the mother they needed you to be 15 years ago." As Carmen turned to leave, Isabella called out, "Mama!" Carmen paused, one hand on the door. "Thank you," Isabella said softly, "for raising them, for loving them when I couldn't, for being what I should have been." Carmen nodded once, a gesture that acknowledged the truth of Isabella's words without offering forgiveness. Then she was gone, leaving Isabella alone with the photos of a family that might have been, had she made different choices all those years ago, back in Portland. Carmen sat at her small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea that had long gone cold. The meeting with Isabella had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Seeing her daughter in that orange jumpsuit, stripped of all pretense and artifice, had awakened the maternal instinct she'd thought long dead where Isabella was concerned. The folder Isabella had given her lay open on the table, copies of the photos Carmen had brought, along with a sealed letter addressed to my sons in Isabella's elegant handwriting. Carmen had promised to deliver it, though she hadn't promised the boys would read it. That choice would be theirs. But there was something else in the folder, something Isabella had included without explanation, a flash drive labeled simply Alejandro. Carmen stared at it, wondering what secrets it might contain. The boys deserved to know their father's story, but she feared what might be on that drive. More pain, perhaps. More betrayal. Her phone rang, jarring her from her thoughts. Miguel's number. "Abuela, how did it go with Mom?" She could hear concern in his voice. Of the three, Miguel had always been the most empathetic, the one most willing to see the humanity in others, even when they didn't deserve it. "It went as well as could be expected," she said carefully. "She gave me some things for you and your brothers." "What kind of things?" "Photos of your father, a letter, and a flash drive I haven't looked at yet." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Do you think we should look at it?" Carmen sighed. "I think that's a decision you boys need to make together. When can you all talk tonight? Miguel said promptly. We have our weekly video call at 8. Can you join us? Of course. Abuela? Miguel's voice softened. Is she okay? The question surprised Carmen. After everything Isabella had done, Miguel still had room for concern. It was one of the things that made him special, that boundless capacity for compassion that would serve him well as a doctor someday. She's adjusting, Carmen said honestly. Prison isn't easy for someone like her. But she was coherent, remorseful, I think, or at least regretful. There's a difference. Yes, Carmen said, thinking of Isabella's tears, wondering if they were for the children she'd abandoned or for the life of privilege she'd lost. Remorse is about the pain you've caused others. Regret is about the consequences you face yourself. And which was it with her? I'm not sure, Carmen admitted. Maybe a bit of both. Will you tell us everything she said tonight? I will, Carmen promised. Every word. After they hung up, Carmen turned her attention back to the flash drive. Her instinct was to preview it, to protect the boys as she'd always done. But they weren't boys anymore. They were young men capable of making their own decisions, processing their own pain. Her job now was to support them, not shield them. She placed the flash drive back in the folder and closed it. A decision made. Whatever secrets Alejandro had left behind, they would face them together. That evening, Carmen sat in front of her laptop. The folder opened beside her as 3 familiar faces appeared on the screen, Lucas from his dorm room at Northwestern. The wall behind him covered in newspaper clippings. Miguel in the study lounge at Stanford. Medical textbooks stacked neatly beside him. Eduardo in his MIT apartment. Surrounded by computer equipment Carmen couldn't begin to identify. Hi, Abuela, they chorused, and despite the seriousness of the occasion, Carmen felt her heart lift at the sight of them. My handsome boys, she said, smiling. How are your studies? They exchanged glances, and Lucas spoke for all of them. We can catch up later. Abuela, tell us about Mom. Carmen nodded, understanding their impatience. She recounted her meeting with Isabella in detail, watching their faces carefully as she described their mother's appearance, her demeanor, her explanations about Alejandro's death. So Dad didn't die in combat, Eduardo said quietly when she finished. He killed himself because of her affair. Yes, Carmen confirmed gently. I'm sorry, mijo. And she left us because we reminded her of him. Miguel's voice cracked slightly. Of her guilt. That's what she said. Lucas's expression had hardened into something unreadable. What's on the flash drive? I don't know, Carmen admitted. I wanted us to look at it together. Eduardo nodded, his fingers already flying over his keyboard. I can set up a secure sharing session. That way we can all see the files at the same time. Give me a minute. While Eduardo worked his technical magic, Carmen showed them the photos Isabella had returned Alejandro in his uniform, looking so much like Lucas it was almost eerie. The wedding photo, the picture of Alejandro cradling all 3 infants in his large arms. His face a mixture of pride and terror that Carmen recognized all too well from her own experience as a new parent. He looks kind, Miguel said softly, studying the image. He was, Carmen confirmed. I only met him a few times before you were born, but he was always respectful, gentle. He adored your mother. And she betrayed him, Lucas said flatly. She was very young, Carmen said, not excusing Isabella's actions but trying to provide context. 21, married to a man who was deployed most of the time, suddenly responsible for triplets. It doesn't justify what she did. But she was overwhelmed. So were you when you took us in, Eduardo pointed out. But you didn't abandon us. Carmen had no answer for that. Instead, she said, she told me something else, something I didn't know until today. She paused, searching for the right words. When she found out she was pregnant, she wasn't sure if Alejandro was your father. She had a paternity test done before she left you with me. You are his biological children, all 3 of you. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, Lucas asked the one Carmen had been dreading. Did she ever love us at all, even for a moment? Carmen thought of Isabella's face when she spoke of the boys, the mixture of pride and shame, the genuine tears. I believe she did, in her way. But loving someone and being capable of caring for them are different things. Your mother didn't have the strength to be what you needed. Okay, I've got the sharing session set up, Eduardo announced, his voice slightly too loud, as if trying to push past the emotion of the moment. I'm sending you all links now. Click on them, and we'll all be able to see the drive contents together. Carmen clicked the link in her email, and a window opened showing a list of files. There weren't many. A video file labeled For My Sons, a PDF document titled Last Will and Testament, and a folder simply named Letters. Should we watch the video first? Miguel asked. Lucas nodded. Let's do it. Eduardo double-clicked the file, and after a moment of buffering, Alejandro Suarez's face filled the screen. Carmen heard 3 sharp intakes of breath from the boys. It was like looking at an older version of Lucas, the same strong jaw, the same intense dark eyes, the same determined set to his mouth. If you're watching this, Alejandro began, his voice deep and slightly accented, then I'm gone, and you're old enough to understand what happened. My name is Alejandro Suarez. I'm your father. He paused, rubbing the hand over his face in a gesture so familiar that Carmen glanced at Lucas, who often did the exact same thing when stressed. I don't know how much your mother has told you, or if she's even in your lives anymore. I suspect not. Isabella was never good at facing difficult things. He sighed heavily. I'm recording this the day after I discovered your mother has been unfaithful during my deployment. I'm not making excuses for what I'm about to do. I know it's selfish and cowardly, but the pain, I can't see a way past it. He looked directly into the camera, his eyes filled with a sorrow so profound that Carmen felt her own heart breaking for him, for the boys, for all that had been lost. I want you to know that this isn't your fault. None of it. You're innocent in all of this. And if there was any other way... He trailed off, shaking his head. I'm leaving you some things. Letters I've written to each of you since I found out Isabella was pregnant. My will, which leaves everything I have to you 3. It's not much, but it includes my grandfather's ranch near El Paso. My parents are gone, but I have a sister, Maria, in San Antonio. She doesn't know about you yet, but she will. I've written to her too. Alejandro's eyes filled with tears. I wish I could be there to see you grow up, to teach you to ride bikes and throw baseballs and ask girls to dance. I wish I could be the father you deserve. Please don't think this means I didn't love you enough. It's my failure, not yours. Never yours. He wiped his eyes, visibly pulling himself together. One last thing. Your mother, she's flawed, deeply flawed, but she gave me you, and for that, I can never truly hate her. If she's in your lives, try to forgive her if you can. Not for her sake, but for yours. Hatred will only poison your own hearts. Alejandro leaned closer to the camera. Vivan bien, mis hijos. Live well, my sons. Be brave. Be kind. Be better than both of us. The screen went black, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Carmen watched the boys' faces, seeing the tears streaming down Miguel's cheeks, the rigid control in Lucas's jaw, the shocked stillness of Eduardo. He knew, Miguel said finally. He knew she would leave us. And he still chose to leave first, Lucas added, his voice tight with anger. He was in pain, Eduardo said softly. People make terrible decisions when they're in that much pain. Carmen looked at her grandsons, these 3 young men processing a loss they'd never been allowed to properly grieve. Your father made a terrible choice, she said gently, but he loved you. That much is clear. Did you know about his sister? Lucas asked. Our Aunt Carmen shook her head. Isabella never mentioned her. I don't think they were in contact. We should find her, Miguel said suddenly. Maria Suarez in San Antonio. She's our family too. Eduardo was already typing. I'll start looking. Lucas was staring at the screen, his expression troubled. Should we read the letters, his last will? That's up to you, Carmen said. You don't have to decide right now. These files aren't going anywhere. What about Mom's letter? Eduardo asked. Did you bring that too? Carmen held up the sealed envelope. I have it here. Do you want me to open it? The boys exchanged glances, having one of their silent conversations. Finally, Lucas nodded. Read it to us. Abuela, please. Carmen carefully broke the seal and unfolded 3 pages of Isabella's flowing handwriting. She cleared her throat and began to read. My dearest Lucas, Miguel, and Eduardo, I hardly know how to begin this letter. I'm sorry seems woefully inadequate for 15 years of absence, and yet those are the only words that come to mind. I am sorrier than you can possibly imagine. Your grandmother told me you want to know the truth about your father. The truth is, Alejandro Suarez was a good man who loved you completely from the moment he knew you existed. He read poetry to Isabella's belly. He painted your nursery himself. 3 cribs arranged in a perfect triangle because he said you should be able to see each other even in sleep. He carried ultrasound photos in his wallet and showed them to anyone who would look. I destroyed him with my selfishness, my immaturity, my inability to appreciate what I had. When he discovered my betrayal, he couldn't bear it. The note he left said he couldn't live with the pain, couldn't face raising children who might not be his. But you are his, all 3 of you. I had you tested before I left. You have his blood, his features, his goodness. I left you with your grandmother because every time I looked at you, I saw him. I saw my guilt reflected in your innocent faces. It was cowardly and unforgivable. A better woman would have stayed, would have honored his memory by raising his sons with love. I was not that woman. The truth about why I came back is equally shameful. Yes, it was about the insurance money. James and I were desperate, our financial house of cards collapsing around us. He convinced me it would be easy to regain custody, to access the funds. I convinced myself I deserved another chance. But then I saw you in that courtroom, these handsome, dignified young men your grandmother had raised, and something shifted inside me. For the first time in 15 years, I saw you as people, not just as painful reminders. I saw what I had missed, what I had thrown away. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even ask for it. What I did is beyond forgiveness. But I do ask that you know this. Your father loved you without reservation or condition. Your grandmother has given you the kind of love I should have but couldn't. And somewhere, buried beneath years of selfishness and denial, there is a part of me that loves you too, not enough to have been the mother you deserved, but enough to finally tell you the truth. You owe me nothing, not your time, not your thoughts, certainly not your love. But if someday, years from now, you ever wonder if your mother thinks of you, the answer is yes, every day, every hour, for the rest of my life. Isabella. Carmen folded the letter and looked up at the screen. The boys were silent, each processing in his own way, Miguel openly weeping, Eduardo staring off into space, Lucas with his jaw clenched so tight Carmen feared for his teeth. It doesn't change anything, Lucas said finally. A pretty letter doesn't erase 15 years. No, Carmen agreed. It doesn't, but it does answer your questions about your father, about why she left. What do we do with this? Eduardo asked, gesturing at the screen where the file directory still showed the unopened folder of letters from Alejandro. Whatever you need to do, Carmen said gently. Read them now, save them for later, delete them entirely. The choice is yours. I want to read them, Miguel said quietly. Not now, but soon. He wrote them for us. Lucas nodded reluctantly. And I want to find our aunt. If she's still in San Antonio. If she's still alive. I'll help you, Carmen promised. Whatever you decide. I'm here. Eduardo had been unusually quiet, his brow furrowed in concentration. There's something else on this drive, he said suddenly, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Something hidden, a deleted file that wasn't completely purged. Can you recover it? Lucas asked. I'm trying. Eduardo worked for several minutes, his expression intense. Got it. It's another video file, older than the one we just watched. Play it, Miguel urged. Eduardo double-clicked, and the screen filled with a different image, a much younger Alejandro, laughing as he filmed Isabella, hugely pregnant, waddling around a nursery with 3 cribs. "Tell the boys what you're doing, Bella." Alejandro's voice came from behind the camera. Isabella, young and radiant despite her exhaustion, smiled at the camera. "I'm arranging your stuffed animals, mis amores. Papa thinks I'm nesting too much, but he doesn't understand that everything has to be perfect for when you arrive." "Show them what you bought today," Alejandro prompted, his voice warm with affection. Isabella held up 3 tiny Marine Corps onesies. "For my little soldiers," she said proudly, "just like their papa." The camera panned around the nursery walls, painted a soft blue, a mural of stars and planets that Alejandro had clearly painted himself. 3 cribs with matching bedding, a rocking chair with a handmade quilt draped over it. "This is where you'll sleep," Alejandro narrated. "We don't know exactly when you'll come. Your mama is only 7 months along, but the doctor says triplets often come early. We're ready, though we can't wait to meet you." The camera swung back to Isabella, who was sitting in the rocking chair now, hands on her enormous belly. "We love you so much already," she said softly. "Your papa and I, we've waited our whole lives for you." The video ended abruptly, freezing on Isabella's smiling face, her eyes full of anticipation and hope for the future that would never come to pass. Carmen looked at her grandsons, seeing the shock on their faces. For 15 years, they'd lived with the knowledge that their mother had abandoned them, that their father had died in combat. Now, in the span of an hour, they'd learned that their father had taken his own life, and their mother had once, however briefly, wanted them. "They loved each other," Miguel said wonderingly. "They were happy." "Before it all fell apart," Lucas added, his voice hollow. Eduardo was staring at the frozen image of his pregnant mother. "We never had a chance to be a real family, did we?" The question broke Carmen's heart. "No, mijos," she said softly. "You didn't, but we made our own family, didn't we? You, me, your grandfather while he was alive. Family isn't always what we're born into. Sometimes it's what we build from the pieces we're given." "You're our real family, abuela," Lucas said firmly. "The only parent that matters is the one who stays." Carmen felt tears gathering in her eyes. "I would have given anything for you to have had both your parents, for Isabella to have been stronger, for Alejandro to have found a way through his pain. You deserved that intact family." "But then we wouldn't have had you," Miguel pointed out. "Not the way we do now." "Family is complicated," Eduardo said thoughtfully. "More complicated than I realized." They sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the weight of everything they'd learned. Finally, Lucas spoke. "I think we should find our aunt, and I think we should read Dad's letters. Maybe not tonight, but soon. We've spent our whole lives not knowing who we came from. I want to know now, even if it hurts." Miguel and Eduardo nodded in agreement. "And what about your mother's letter?" Carmen asked gently. "What do you want to do about that?" The boys exchanged glances again. It was Miguel who answered. "I don't think any of us are ready to respond to her, but I'm glad we know the truth now. All of it." "Me too," Eduardo said. "It's better than wondering." Lucas was the last to speak, his expression thoughtful. "I don't forgive her," he said finally. "I don't know if I ever will, but I understand better now. And maybe that's enough for now." Carmen nodded, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. These boys, these men would be all right. They had each other, they had her, and now they had the truth, however painful it might be. It was more than many people ever got in this life. "I love you, mis nietos," she said softly. "More than you will ever know." "We love you too, abuela," they chorused. And in that moment, despite the revelations and the pain, despite the past that could never be changed, Carmen felt a profound sense of peace. They had built something precious from the broken pieces they'd been given, a family bound not by obligation or biology alone, but by choice, by sacrifice, by love that had been tested and proven over 15 years of shared life. 3 months later, I stood in the corridor of my new house. Our new house, a modest 4-bedroom in a quiet Portland neighborhood the boys had chosen for its proximity to my favorite grocery store and the community center where I volunteered. I ran my fingers along the freshly painted wall, still marveling at how quickly life could change. From a cramped apartment where 3 growing boys had barely fit, to this spacious home with a real yard and a kitchen big enough for all of us to cook together. The closing had gone smoothly, exactly as the boys had planned. They'd thought of everything, putting the house in my name, setting up accounts for property taxes and maintenance, even arranging for a gardening service when they realized my arthritis might make yard work difficult. My grandsons, always thinking ahead. "Abuela," Miguel's voice called from the kitchen. "Where do you want the spice rack to go?" It was winter break, and all 3 boys were home from college, turning this house into our home with the same focused determination they brought to everything. Lucas was assembling furniture, Eduardo setting up the Wi-Fi and smart home system, and Miguel organizing the kitchen the way he knew I liked it. "On the counter by the stove," I answered, making my way to the kitchen. "You know me too well." Miguel smiled, that gentle smile that always reminded me of his grandfather. "Well, I've only watched you cook for 17 years. I touched his cheek, noting the faint stubble that still surprised me. When had my babies grown into men with stubbled cheeks and deep voices? "Have you heard anything from that investigator?" I asked. Miguel's expression grew serious. "Lucas got an email this morning. They found her Maria Suarez Vasquez. She's still in San Antonio, working as a high school Spanish teacher. She's married with 2 kids of her own." "Your cousins," I said softly. "Yeah." Miguel arranged my collection of dried chilies in a ceramic bowl, his movements deliberate. "Lucas is drafting an email to her. He wants us all to approve it before he sends it." The discovery of their aunt had given the boys a new connection to their father, a living link to the man they'd never known. Finding her had become a project that united them across their 3 college campuses, something they worked on together during their weekly video calls. "And your mother's letters?" I asked carefully. "Have you read them yet?" After discovering the cache of letters Alejandro had written to each son, the boys had made a pact to read them together during winter break. Isabella, too, had begun writing from prison 1 letter a week to each boy, none of which had been answered yet. "Tonight," Miguel said, his eyes meeting mine. "We decided last night. It's time." I nodded, understanding the significance of this decision. For 15 years, I'd been their only parent, their safe harbor. Now they were reaching back into their past, connecting with the ghosts of the parents who'd left them, one by choice, one by tragedy. "Will you sit with us?" Miguel asked, a vulnerability in his voice that reminded me he was still so young, despite his height and deepening voice. "If you want me to," I said. "But this is your journey, mijo. Your father's words were meant for you. We need you there," he said simply. "You're part of this too." The back door opened, and Eduardo came in carrying a small tree in a pot. "Look what I found at the nursery," he announced. "A Meyer lemon tree. It can grow indoors in the winter, and we can move it to the patio in summer." I smiled at his enthusiasm. Eduardo had always been my gardener, even in our tiny apartment where he'd nurtured herbs on the windowsill. "It's perfect, cariño." "Where's Lucas?" Miguel asked, looking past his brother. "Garage. He's setting up a workbench. Says he wants to build you a proper sewing table. Abuela." My heart swelled. Lucas, always the protector, always looking for ways to make life better for those he loved. "I should start dinner," I said, moving toward the refrigerator. "You boys must be starving after working all day." "Already ordered," Eduardo said with a grin. "Lucas called in pizza from that place you like, the one with the wood-fired oven." "The fancy one that's too expensive." "Abuela," Miguel interrupted gently, "let us do this. You've taken care of us our whole lives. Let us take care of you for a change." I started to protest, then stopped myself. This was new territory for all of us, me learning to receive, them learning to give. Part of loving them now meant allowing them this role reversal, accepting their care with grace. "Fine," I said, throwing up my hands in mock surrender. "But I'm making flan for dessert." No arguments. They exchanged grins, knowing they'd won a small victory. Later that evening, after pizza and flan, We gathered in the living room. Lucas carried in a wooden box he'd found at an antique store. Beautiful, hand-carved cedar that he'd restored himself. Inside were the letters, organized chronologically, each in its own envelope with a son's name written in Alejandro's strong hand. I thought we should keep them in something special, he explained, setting the box on the coffee table. The boys arranged themselves on the couch, and I took the armchair across from them, close enough to offer support, but giving them space for this intimate moment. Lucas opened the box and carefully removed the first 3 letters. Each dated the same day, the day Alejandro had learned Isabella was pregnant. Oldest to youngest, Eduardo suggested, and his brothers nodded. Lucas opened his envelope first, unfolding the paper with care. He cleared his throat and began to read, "My son, today I learned I'm going to be a father. Your mother showed me the test results with tears in her eyes. Happy tears, she says. Though I know she's scared too. We both are. We're young and not as stable as we'd like to be. But I promise you this. I will love you with everything I have. I will be the father I wish I'd had. I will show up every day. For the rest of my life. Even when I'm deployed, I'll find ways to be present. This is my first promise to you, and I intend to keep it. Your father, Alejandro." Lucas's voice broke on the last words, and he looked down, jaw tight. Miguel took his letter next, his hands trembling slightly as he read, "My son, your mother says we're having a boy. Just one, she thinks. Though it's early yet. I'm already imagining teaching you to play baseball, to fish, to be a good man. My own father left when I was 8. I barely remember him now. Just a shadow, a voice. The smell of cigarettes and engine oil. I won't be a shadow to you. I'll be solid, present, real. This is my promise. Your father, Alejandro." Eduardo was already opening his letter, his expression focused as he read, "My son, I'm shipping out tomorrow for a 6-month deployment. Your mother is only 10 weeks along, so you're still smaller than a lime, according to the app I downloaded. I talk to you every night, my hand on your mother's still flat belly. I tell her it's too early for you to hear me, but she says you know my voice already. I want to believe her. I've left letters for while I'm gone, 1 for each week. Isabella promises to read them to you, so you'll know my voice when I return. I'll be back long before you're born. Until then, grow strong. Your father, Alejandro." The room fell silent as the words settled around us. These letters, written with such hope and certainty by a man who had no idea what the future held, that he would have not 1 son but 3, that his wife would betray him, that he would end his own life before they were even 6 months old. "There are dozens more," Lucas said, looking into the box. "1 for every week he was deployed, and then more after he returned, after he knew about the triplets. Should we read them all tonight?" Miguel asked, his voice thick with emotion. Lucas shook his head. "I don't think I can," he admitted. "It's too much." "Maybe 1 more each," Eduardo suggested. From after he knew about the triplets, they selected 3 more letters. These dated after the ultrasound that revealed Isabella was carrying triplets. Again, Lucas read first, "My son, my firstborn son. The doctors now tell us I'm still in shock. 3 of you 3 boys. The odds are astronomical, the doctor says, especially without fertility treatments. I've been walking around the base in a daze, telling everyone who will listen. 3 sons. I keep saying it, trying to make it real. I'm overjoyed and terrified. How will we manage? But we will. Somehow we will. I've started looking for a bigger apartment. Your mother is panicking about car seats and cribs, but beneath the panic is joy. We made 3 lives together, 3 boys who will grow into men. I promise I will be worthy of all of you. Your father, Alejandro." Miguel wiped his eyes before reading his letter. "My son, my second son by 3 minutes. They tell us I saw you today on the ultrasound. All 3 of you, moving and kicking. The technician pointed out each of you, labeled you baby A, baby B, baby C. So clinical, so inadequate for the miracle we were witnessing. You were sucking your thumb. Did you know that while your brothers were doing somersaults, you were quietly sucking your thumb? So peaceful, so content. I think you might be the calm one, the steady center between your brothers. Just a guess, a father's intuition. Already I'm looking for your personality, the traits that will make you uniquely you. Your father. Alejandro. Eduardo adjusted his glasses, a gesture so like his father it made my breath catch, and read, "My son, my youngest, by a mere 5 minutes, you're the mischief maker already." The ultrasound technician laughed when she saw you kicking your brothers, making space for yourself. "The smallest but the most active," she said. "I could have watched you 3 for hours. This secret underwater ballet. Your mother is uncomfortable now, growing bigger every day, but she smiles when you kick. 3 boys. I still can't believe it. I've started collecting books, one for each of you, with personalized inscriptions. I want you to know from the very beginning that you are individuals to me, not a matched set. You are Eduardo, uniquely yourself, loved completely for exactly who you are. Your father, Alejandro." I watched my grandsons absorb these words, these gifts from the father they'd never known. How strange it must be to discover, at 17, that you had been wanted, had been loved, had been planned for with such care only to be abandoned, through death and choice, before you could even form memories. "He knew us," Eduardo said wonderingly. "Somehow, he already knew us. I was the active one. Miguel was the calm one. Lucas was the leader." "Personality shows early," I said softly. "Even in the womb." Lucas was turning his letter over in his hands, his expression troubled. "These were written before," he said. "Before he found out about Mom's affair. Before he decided to leave us." "Yes," I agreed, not sugarcoating the truth. "Before his pain overwhelmed his love for you." "I'm angry at him," Lucas admitted, his voice low, "for giving up, for leaving us, for breaking every promise in these letters." "You have the right to be angry," I said. "Both your parents failed you, in different ways." "But you didn't," Miguel said, looking at me with those clear, kind eyes. "You kept your promises, even the ones you never made." The simplicity of his statement brought tears to my eyes. "I did my best," I said. "That's all any of us can do." "What do we do about Mom's letters?" Eduardo asked, gesturing to a separate stack on the table, the weekly letters Isabella had been sending from prison, all unopened. The boys looked at each other, having one of their silent conversations. Finally, Lucas spoke. "I'm not ready yet. Maybe after the holidays." "Me either," Miguel agreed. "I think I might be," Eduardo said quietly. His brothers looked at him in surprise. "Not to forgive her," he clarified. "Just to know what she has to say." "Whatever you decide," I said. "You don't have to do it together. You're triplets, yes, but you're also individuals. Your relationships with your parents, both of them can be different." They considered this, the permission to follow separate paths after a lifetime of moving as a unit. "What about Aunt Maria?" Miguel asked, changing the subject. "Have you finished the email?" Lucas nodded. "I sent it this morning. I included a photo of us, and one of Dad that we found on the flash drive. I explained who we are, that we only recently learned about her, that we'd like to connect if she's willing." "What if she doesn't answer?" Eduardo voiced the fear they all shared. "Then we respect her choice," I said firmly. "Not everyone is ready to welcome unexpected family into their lives." "Like Mom wasn't," Miguel said softly. "Yes," I acknowledged. "Like your mother wasn't." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future hanging in the air. Then Lucas stood abruptly. "Enough heavy stuff for tonight. Eduardo, didn't you say you set up that gaming system? I bet I can still beat both of you at Mario Kart." Eduardo grinned, grateful for the change in mood. "You wish? I've been practicing at MIT." "Against those engineering nerds, please," Miguel scoffed. "Stanford pre-med students are the real gamers." Just like that, they were boys again, racing to the family room where Eduardo had set up a television and game console, their voices raised in familiar competitive banter. I stayed behind, carefully returning the letters to the wooden box, my heart full to bursting with love for these young men who'd endured so much and still found joy, still found ways to move forward. My phone buzzed with a text notification. Unknown number. But the message made it clear who it was from. Mama, the boys haven't answered my letters. Are they reading them? Please tell them I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just a chance to explain. My therapy group says I need to make amends, even if they're not accepted. 3 more months until parole hearing. Still sober. Still trying. Isabella. Always wanting more than she was willing to give. I stared at the message, weighing my response. I owed her nothing, but the boys deserved to know she was still reaching out. I typed back, "They're not ready. Eduardo might read your letters soon. The others need more time. Don't push." The response came immediately. "I understand." Are they okay? Such a simple question, but loaded with 15 years of absence. Were they okay, these boys who'd grown up without their parents, who'd had to piece together their identities from fragments and photographs? "They're remarkable young men," I replied. "You would be proud if you knew them. But you don't, Isabella. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That's for them to decide." I put the phone away without waiting for her response. From the family room came the sounds of laughter and playful arguing, the soundtrack of our life together. Whatever came next, reconciliation with Isabella, connection with their aunt, the ongoing discovery of their father through his letters, they would face it with the strength and resilience they'd built over 17 years. And I would be there, as I had always been, to support them through it all. The parole hearing was scheduled for mid-March, just as the boys were preparing for spring break. Isabella had continued her weekly letters, and to my surprise, all 3 boys had finally begun reading them, though none had responded yet. The letters had evolved from explanations and justifications to more honest reflections on her failings, her time in prison, her therapy progress. Whether this represented genuine growth or calculated manipulation remained to be seen. Lucas called me one evening in late February, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "Abuela, turn on Channel 8 News. Now." I fumbled for the remote, finding the news channel where a stern-faced anchor was mid-sentence. "Harrington, already serving time for wire fraud and money laundering, now faces additional charges after federal investigators uncovered evidence of a Ponzi scheme that defrauded investors of over $30 million. His wife, Isabella Rodriguez Harrington, currently serving 18 months at the Federal Correctional Institution in Dublin, California, may also face new charges as investigators believe she was more deeply involved in the scheme than previously thought." The screen showed James Harrington being led in handcuffs from a courthouse, his face haggard and unshaven. Then a photo of Isabella, her mugshot from the previous arrest. "Are you watching?" Lucas asked over the phone. "Yes," I said, stunned. "I'm watching. They're saying she could get 10 to 15 years if convicted on these new charges," Lucas continued. "Her parole hearing next month is canceled." I sat heavily in my chair, trying to process this information. "Do your brothers know?" "I've texted them. We're setting up a call for tonight." He paused. "What do you think this means for us?" The question wasn't just about legal implications, I knew. It was about emotional ones. About closure and moving forward. About the tentative steps the boys had been taking toward possibly reconnecting with their mother someday. "I don't know, mijo," I said honestly. "Let's wait until we know more before we decide anything." After we hung up, I sat watching the news unfold, details of the scheme emerging with each report. James had been running an elaborate fraud for years, using new investor money to pay returns to earlier investors while siphoning millions for his lavish lifestyle. And Isabella, it seemed, had been more than just an unwitting spouse. Emails and documents suggested she'd helped recruit investors, knowing full well the operation was fraudulent. I thought of her letters to the boys, her claims of rehabilitation and growth. Had it all been another performance, another mask she wore to get what she wanted? The boys' video call that night was somber, their faces grave as they discussed the implications. "If she gets convicted on these new charges, she could be in prison until we're in our 30s, Eduardo said, his usual energy subdued. "If she's guilty," Miguel pointed out. "We don't know for sure yet." Lucas shook his head. "The evidence sounds pretty damning. Miguel, Those emails they quoted on the news about finding fresh money and keeping the plates spinning, that doesn't sound like someone who was in the dark. Miguel struggled for words. I was starting to think maybe she was changing. Her recent letters seemed more honest. Or she was just getting better at lying, Lucas said flatly. I watched them process this new betrayal, this additional layer of deception from a mother who had already failed them so completely. What do we do now? Eduardo asked, looking directly at me through the screen. You do whatever feels right to you, I said gently. If you want to keep reading her letters, do that. If you want to stop, that's okay too. If you want to write it to her and ask for her side of the story, you can. Would you? Lucas asked. If you were us, would you keep the door open at all? I considered the question carefully. I'm not sure I'm the right person to ask. Mijo, my relationship with your mother is complicated. I failed her in many ways when she was young, and she's hurt me deeply as an adult. My judgment isn't objective. But you're the most fair person we know, Miguel insisted. Even after everything she did, you never told us to hate her. That was true, despite my anger, despite my sense of betrayal. I'd always tried to leave room for the possibility of reconciliation, not for my sake, but for theirs. I believe people can change, I said slowly. I've seen it happen, but true change is rare and difficult, and it can't be rushed or forced. It requires complete honesty with others and with yourself. And you don't think Mom is being honest? Eduardo asked. I chose my words carefully. I think your mother is someone who has spent her life playing roles she thought would get her what she wanted. Devoted wife, grieving widow, successful socialite, repentant mother. The question is whether she's finally ready to stop playing roles and start being real. And if these new charges are true, that would suggest she's still playing roles, Lucas concluded. Yes, I agreed. It would. They fell silent, absorbing this. Finally, Miguel spoke up. I got a letter from Aunt Maria today. This was unexpected news. What did she say? Miguel's face brightened slightly. She was shocked to hear from us. She said she'd lost touch with Alejandro years before he died. Had no idea he'd gotten married or had children. But she's eager to meet us. She invited us to San Antonio for spring break. All three of you? I asked. And you too, Abuela, Miguel said. She specifically mentioned you. Said she wanted to thank you in person for raising her brother's sons. The invitation moved me deeply. This woman, a stranger connected to us only through the boy's father, had thought to include me in the family reunion. What did you tell her? I asked. That we'd discuss it and let her know, Lucas said. We wanted to talk to you first. It's your decision, I said. But I think it could be good for you to connect with your father's family, to see parts of yourselves in people who share your blood. Would you come with us? Eduardo asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. If you want me to, I said. But I could also stay behind, give you space to connect with her on your own. We want you there, Lucas said firmly, his brothers nodding in agreement. You're part of this story too. Later that night, after the call ended, I sat on my new porch swing, bundled against the early spring chill. The neighborhood was quiet, just the distant sound of traffic and the soft rustling of emerging leaves in the breeze. I thought about Isabella, facing new charges that could keep her imprisoned for much of her son's young adulthood. I thought about Maria Suarez Vasquez, reaching out to welcome nephews she'd never known existed. I thought about Alejandro, whose letters were gradually being read by the sons he'd never had the chance to know. And I thought about myself, a woman who'd raised 3 boys into fine young men, who'd found purpose and meaning in a role she'd never expected to fill. There was a symmetry to it all, a balance of loss and discovery, of doors closing and opening. My phone buzzed with a text from Isabella. Have the boys seen the news? Please tell them it's not what it looks like. I didn't know what James was doing until it was too late. I'll explain everything if they'll just read my letters. Please, Mama, I can't lose them again. I stared at the message, hearing the desperation, the fear. Part of me, the mother who remembered Isabella as a little girl with skinned knees and big dreams, wanted to believe her. Another part, the grandmother who'd wiped away the tears of abandoned children knew better than to trust her words. I typed back, "They've seen the news. They're processing it. Give them time. Isabella. If you're truly innocent, the truth will come out. If not, then they deserve honesty. Not more manipulation." Her response came quickly. "I've made so many mistakes, but I swear I'm trying to be better now. For them. For myself. Even if they never forgive me." I put the phone away without replying. Time would reveal whether Isabella's remorse was genuine or just another performance. In the meantime, the boys had their lives to live, their paths to forge, and I had the privilege of watching them grow, of supporting them through whatever came next. Inside the house, the wooden box of Alejandro's letters sat on the mantel, a bridge between past and present. Beside it was a framed photograph of the boys at their high school graduation, flanking me with proud smiles. And next to that, a newer edition of family tree Miguel had created, tracing the Rodriguez and Suarez lineages, with branches for Isabella and Alejandro, for me and Roberto, for the boys themselves, and now for Maria and her family. It wasn't the family any of us had expected. It was broken in places, grafted together in others. But it was ours, shaped by choices both terrible and beautiful, by absences and presences, by love that endured despite everything. Spring in San Antonio painted the city in vibrant colors, bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush lining the highways, jacaranda trees dropping purple blossoms on the sidewalks. We'd flown in the day before, the boys uncharacteristically quiet on the journey, nervous about meeting their father's sister for the first time. Maria Suarez Vasquez lived in a charming Spanish-style home in a historic neighborhood, with terracotta pots of geraniums lining the front walk and a hand-painted welcome sign on the door. She'd insisted on hosting us for lunch, despite my offers to meet at a restaurant to ease the pressure. "We're family," she'd said firmly over the phone, her voice warm and slightly accented. "Family meets at home." Now, standing on her doorstep, I felt the boys' tension. Lucas kept adjusting his collar. Miguel fidgeted with the bouquet of flowers we'd brought, and Eduardo checked his phone compulsively, though I knew he had no messages to read. "Ready?" I asked softly. They nodded, and Lucas reached out to ring the bell. A chime sounded inside, followed by quick footsteps. The door swung open, and there she was, Maria, a petite woman in her early 50s with the same dark eyes as Alejandro, the same determined set to her jaw that I saw every day in Lucas's face. For a moment, she simply stared at the boys, her hand covering her mouth. Then, without warning, she stepped forward and embraced Lucas, who stood nearest. "Dios mío," she whispered. "You look just like him." Something in Lucas broke open then. His arms, initially stiff at his sides, came up to return her embrace. Over her shoulder, his eyes met mine, filled with a mix of wonder and grief, the recognition of a connection he'd been missing his whole life. Maria moved to Miguel next, then Eduardo, hugging each with the same fierce welcome. When she came to me, her eyes were wet. "Carmen," she said, taking my hands in hers. "Thank you for raising my brother's sons, for loving them when he couldn't." The simple acknowledgement of Alejandro's absence, of my presence, of the complicated tapestry of love and loss that had brought us to this moment, moved me deeply. "They made it easy to love them," I said, squeezing her hands. She ushered us inside, into a home filled with color and light hand-woven textiles, pottery from Mexico, family photographs covering every surface. And there, on the mantel, a picture I recognized from the flash drive, Alejandro in his Marine uniform, young and serious and so like Lucas it made my breath catch. "My husband and children will join us later," Maria explained, leading us to a dining room where the table was set with care. "I thought we should have some time first, just us, to talk." Over a lunch of chiles rellenos, rice, and fresh tortillas, Maria shared stories of Alejandro as a boy, his stubbornness, his sense of justice, his love of poetry that had seemed so at odds with his decision to join the Marines. "He was searching for structure, I think," she said, passing a plate of sliced avocados. Our childhood was unstable. Our father left when Alejandro was 8. I was 10. Our mother worked 3 jobs to keep us fed. Alejandro practically raised himself. He told us a little about that in his letters, Miguel said. That he barely remembered his father. Maria nodded. He was determined to be different, to be present for his children. Her voice caught. When I got the call about his suicide, I couldn't believe it. It seemed so unlike him. To give up. He was in pain, Eduardo said quietly. Our mother, she hurt him deeply. Yes, Maria acknowledged. But still, to leave his children. She shook her head. I've often wondered if he was thinking clearly, if depression or PTSD from his deployment clouded his judgment. I hadn't considered this possibility that Alejandro's decision might have been influenced by factors beyond Isabella's betrayal. The boys exchanged glances, processing this new perspective on their father's final choice. We've been reading his letters, Lucas said. He wrote to each of us, starting when he first found out about the pregnancy. He seemed so certain, so sure he was going to be a good father. He would have been, Maria said with conviction. The Alejandro I knew was loyal, devoted, responsible. Whatever happened at the end, that wasn't the brother I grew up with. Do you have pictures? Eduardo asked. From when you were kids. Maria's face lit up. Albums full, and home videos our mother took. I've digitized everything for you. She reached for her phone, tapping the screen. I've also arranged something special. Our cousin Diego still lives in El Paso, near our grandfather's ranch, the one Alejandro left to you boys in his will. He's been maintaining it all these years. I thought maybe, after a few days here, we might all drive out there. See the place where your father and I spent our summers growing up. The boys looked to me, silently seeking guidance. I nodded encouragingly. That sounds wonderful, if you feel up to it. There's one more thing, Maria said, her expression growing serious. I wasn't sure whether to bring this up, but I think you should know. After Alejandro died, there was an investigation standard procedure for military suicides. They found evidence of prescription antidepressants in his system, medication he'd been prescribed but had apparently stopped taking abruptly just days before his death. What does that mean? Miguel asked. His medical interests piqued. The investigator told me that suddenly stopping certain antidepressants can sometimes cause severe side effects, increased depression, suicidal thoughts, impaired judgment. It's possible that Alejandro's decision that night wasn't entirely his own, that his medication withdrawal, combined with the emotional shock of discovering Isabella's affair, created a perfect storm. The information hung in the air between us, a new piece in the puzzle of Alejandro's death. Not an excuse, but perhaps an explanation, a factor that complicated the narrative of a father who had simply chosen to abandon his sons. Why didn't anyone tell us this before? Lucas asked, his voice tight. I don't think anyone knew to tell you, Maria said gently. I lost touch with Isabella after the funeral. I didn't even know where she'd gone, let alone that she'd left you with your grandmother. And by the time I tried to find her a few years later, to share some family keepsakes that belonged to Alejandro, she'd disappeared completely. After lunch, Maria took us into her study, where she'd set up a projector and screen. I thought you might want to see your father in motion, hear his voice. The boys sat close together on a small sofa, shoulders touching in that unconscious way they had of supporting each other through difficult moments. I took a chair slightly behind them, present, but giving them space to experience this connection to their father without mediating their reactions. Maria dimmed the lights and started the video footage from a family barbecue when Alejandro was about 15, laughing as he helped his grandfather tend a grill, his Spanish flowing easily as he joked with cousins. Then Alejandro at 17, serious in his high school graduation gown, Alejandro at 20, in his marine dress uniform, standing tall and proud as he took his oath. And finally, Alejandro at 22, seated on Maria's couch with his arm around a young, beaming Isabella, both of them glowing with joy. We're going to be parents, he announced to the camera, his voice deep and slightly accented. So like Lucas's, it was eerie. Triplets, can you believe it? 3 boys. He kissed Isabella's temple, his expression a mixture of terror and elation. "I'm going to have 3 sons to teach baseball and fishing and how to treat a lady right," Isabella laughed, leaning into him. "And poetry," she added. "Don't forget the poetry." "Yes," he agreed, smiling down at her. "Neruda for bedtime stories." The footage ended, freezing on Alejandro's smiling face. The room was silent except for the soft sound of Miguel crying, his shoulders shaking with the effort to remain quiet. Eduardo had removed his glasses, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Lucas sat perfectly still, his jaw clenched in that way that told me he was fighting for control. Maria turned the lights back on and came to kneel in front of the boys. "He loved you," she said simply. "From the moment he knew you existed, he loved you. Whatever happened after his suicide, your mother's choices that love was real. I saw it in him. I heard it in every phone call when he talked about becoming a father." Lucas nodded, unable to speak. Miguel reached out and took Maria's hand. Eduardo replaced his glasses, his expression thoughtful. "Thank you," I said softly to Maria, "for keeping his memory alive, for sharing him with them." She looked up at me, her eyes wet. "Thank you for giving them the foundation Alejandro would have wanted for them, for raising them to be men he would have been proud of." Later, as we walked back to our hotel in the warm spring evening, the boys were quiet, processing everything they'd learned. I didn't push, giving them space to sort through their feelings. Finally, as we waited at a crosswalk, Lucas spoke. "He was a real person," he said, his voice low. "Not just a story or a photograph. A real person who wanted us." "And who was sick," Miguel added. "The medication thing that makes sense medically. Stopping certain SSRIs cold turkey can definitely cause suicidal ideation." "It doesn't change what he did," Eduardo pointed out. "But it helps explain it. Maybe." "Yes," I agreed. "Understanding isn't the same as excusing, but it can help with acceptance." We crossed the street, moving through the gathering dusk toward our hotel. A mariachi band was playing in a restaurant we passed, the familiar strains of Cielito Lindo spilling onto the sidewalk. For a moment, I was transported back to my own childhood in Mexico, before my family had moved to the United States, before I'd met Roberto, before Isabella had been born. Life was a series of before and after moments. I realized, doorways we stepped through, never able to return to what was before. "What are you thinking about?" Abuela, Miguel asked, noticing my expression. "About doorways," I said. "About how life changes in an instant, and we have to decide how to live on the other side of those changes." Lucas nodded, understanding immediately. "Like when Mom left us with you, like when Dad died, like when Mom came back and then went to prison." "Exactly," I said. "And also like today, meeting your aunt, seeing your father on video, learning new things about why he made the choices he did." "Another doorway," Eduardo mused. "But this one feels different, like we're gaining something instead of losing something." "That's exactly it," I said, proud of his insight. Life isn't just about loss, it's also about discovery, about connections we didn't know were possible. As we reached the hotel, my phone buzzed with a text. I checked it, expecting a message from Maria about our plans for the next day. Instead, it was from Isabella. "New evidence in James's case. My lawyer says charges against me might be dropped. Computer records show I wasn't involved in the fraud. Mama, please tell the boys. Please tell them I might be coming home sooner than we thought." I stared at the message, unsure how to feel. Part of me hoped for the boys' sake that Isabella was innocent of these latest charges, that perhaps she was truly on a path to becoming someone more reliable, more honest. Another part remembered all the broken promises, all the manipulation, all the years of absence. "Who is it?" Lucas asked, noting my expression. "Your mother," I said, deciding honesty was the only path forward. "She says new evidence might clear her of the additional charges, that she might be released sooner than expected." The boys exchanged glances, having one of their silent conversations. Finally, Miguel spoke. "If she's innocent, that's good. She shouldn't be punished for something she didn't do." "But if she's released," Eduardo said, "what does that mean for us?" Does she expect to be part of our lives now? That's entirely up to you, I assured them. You're adults now. You get to decide what relationship, if any, you want with her. Lucas was quiet, his expression troubled. Finally, he said, let's not think about Mom right now. Today was about Dad, about Aunt Maria, about that side of our family. Let's stay with that. The others nodded in agreement, and I put my phone away, respecting their choice to focus on the connections they were building rather than the complications Isabella always seemed to bring. In our hotel suite that night, after the boys had gone to their room, I sat by the window overlooking the San Antonio Riverwalk, watching the lights reflect on the water. I thought about doorways, about choices, about the ways we build family from the materials life gives us. Isabella might be released soon. Maria and her family were eager to build relationships with the boys. Alejandro's legacy lived on in letters and videos and in the characteristics he'd passed to his sons. And I, who had once failed my own daughter, had somehow managed to raise 3 remarkable young men who were finding their way through a complex web of family connections with grace and resilience. Whatever came next, reconciliation, boundaries, new relationships, or the strengthening of existing ones, I knew with absolute certainty that Lucas, Miguel, and Eduardo would face it together, as they always had, and I would be there, offering guidance when asked, stepping back when needed, loving them through it all. That, after all, was what real family did. Not perfect, not unbroken, but present, always present. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and don't forget to share this video with someone who might need to hear this story.